The transport ship Harmony's edge shuddered as it entered the atmosphere of Kepler 442b, its hull groaning under the stress of atmospheric entry. Inside the passenger bay, 200 cadets from 17 different species sat strapped to their seats, most of them trying to hide their nervousness behind stoic expressions. The Galactic Military Academy's annual survival exercise was legendary throughout the known systems, and this year's location had been kept secret until the very moment of departure. Cadet Marcus Chen pressed his face against the small porthole, watching as alien clouds swirled past in shades of purple and green. The gravity here was almost twice what he was used to on Earth, but his enhanced physiology could handle it. What concerned him more was the complete silence from the other cadets. Usually, these transport rides were filled with nervous chatter and boasting, but today everyone seemed unusually quiet. "Attention cadets," the ship's AI announced through the intercom system. "We are now entering the final approach to your training ground. Please note that Kepler 442b is classified as a Class 7 Deathworld by the Galactic Safety Council. The mortality rate for unprotected sentience on this planet's surface exceeds 97% within the first standard hour." A collective intake of breath swept through the passenger bay. Even Marcus felt his pulse quicken. Class 7 was nearly at the top of the danger scale. Only Class 8 and 9 worlds were considered more lethal, and those were typically reserved for prisoners sentenced to exile or death. The Zephyrian cadet sitting next to Marcus, whose name he remembered as Veltar, turned toward him with wide, silver eyes. The Zephyrians were known throughout the galaxy for their exceptional hearing and natural stealth abilities, making them excellent scouts and infiltrators. Veltar's species had evolved on a world of floating islands and perpetual storms, so they weren't easily frightened. "Human," Veltar whispered, his voice carrying the musical quality typical of his people, "your species has experience with Deathworlds, correct?" "Earth is classified as Class 4, if I remember the database correctly." Marcus nodded, though he could see the uncertainty in the alien's expression. "That's right, but Class 4 is nothing compared to Class 7. We're definitely not prepared for whatever's down there." Before Veltar could respond, the transport ship lurched violently to one side. Emergency lights began flashing, and the AI's voice returned, though this time it carried an edge of urgency that artificial intelligences weren't supposed to possess. "All cadets, prepare for emergency landing procedures. We are experiencing aggressive interference from indigenous life forms. The landing zone has been compromised." Through his porthole, Marcus caught glimpses of massive shapes moving through the clouds below. They were too large and too fast to be aircraft, and their movements had an organic fluidity that sent chills down his spine. Whatever lived on this world was already taking notice of their arrival. The landing was rough but survivable. The transport ship scraped across what appeared to be a crystalline plain, leaving deep gouges in the strange, glass-like surface before finally coming to rest against a cluster of towering spires that looked more grown than built. Steam hissed from various points along the hull, and the artificial gravity fluctuated for several moments before stabilizing. As the passenger bay doors opened with a pneumatic hiss, the cadets got their first taste of Kepler 442b's atmosphere. The air was thick and humid, carrying scents that seemed to shift and change with every breath. One moment it smelled like ozone and metal, the next like decaying vegetation or something vaguely floral. The sky above was a deep amber color, with two small suns casting overlapping shadows across the alien landscape. Commander Theklan, a massive Brutarian whose species had earned their reputation as the galaxy's finest warriors, stood at the exit ramp with his forearms crossed over his chest. His rock-like skin bore the scars of countless battles, and his voice rumbled like distant thunder when he spoke. "Cadets, your survival exercise begins now. You have 72 standard hours to reach the extraction point, which is located approximately 200 kilometers northeast of here. You will work in teams of 10, mixed species as assigned. Each team has one emergency beacon, to be used only in life-threatening situations. Use it, and your entire team fails the exercise." He gestured toward the alien landscape stretching out before them. This world is home to several apex predator species, each capable of killing an entire platoon of trained soldiers. Your survival will depend not on your individual strength, but on your ability to work together despite your differences. The galaxy is counting on the next generation of officers to bridge the gaps between our species. The teams were assembled quickly, with cadets from different worlds grouped together in what appeared to be a deliberately challenging mix. Marcus found himself assigned to Team 7, along with Veltar the Zephyrian, a massive Kandorian named Brix whose crystalline exoskeleton sparkled in the amber sunlight, a pair of Nexaran twins who communicated primarily through bioluminescent patterns on their skin, a methane-breathing Sulfurian who had to remain in his environmental suit, and 3 others whose species Marcus didn't immediately recognize. As the teams dispersed into the alien wilderness, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The crystalline spires around the crash site seemed to hum with a low frequency that he could feel in his bones, and shadows moved between them in ways that didn't match the position of the twin suns overhead. The first few hours of their journey passed without major incident. The team moved through a forest of what appeared to be living metal trees, their branches swaying in a breeze that carried whispers in unknown languages. The Nexaran twins proved invaluable as scouts, their natural ability to camouflage themselves allowing them to range ahead and report back through their light-based communication system. It was Veltar who first noticed that something was following them. His enhanced hearing picked up the subtle sounds of movement that paralleled their path through the metal forest, always staying just out of sight but never falling behind. "We are not alone," he whispered to Marcus during a brief rest stop. "Something large moves through the trees to our south. It has been following us for the past 2 hours." Marcus strained his human senses but could detect nothing unusual. The forest around them seemed almost peaceful, with strange bird-like creatures calling from the metallic branches overhead and small, luminescent insects drifting through the air like living stars. But he had learned to trust the superior senses of his alien teammates. "Any idea what it might be?" he asked, keeping his voice low. Before Veltar could answer, the Kandorian Brix suddenly froze in place, his crystalline body resonating with a deep, harmonic tone. The sound was beautiful and terrifying at the same time, and it caused every other sound in the forest to fall silent. "Apex Predator," Brix rumbled, his voice like grinding stone. "My crystalline structure detects massive bioelectric field approaching from multiple directions. We are being hunted." The team immediately went into defensive formation, though none of them had any real weapons beyond basic survival tools. The Academy's philosophy was that true officers should be able to survive through intelligence and cooperation rather than superior firepower. The first creature emerged from between the metal trees like a nightmare-given form. It stood nearly 4 meters tall at the shoulder, with a body that seemed to be constructed from living shadow and starlight. Its eyes were pools of swirling darkness, and, when it moved, reality seemed to bend slightly around its edges. Most terrifying of all was its complete silence. Despite its massive size, it made no sound as it approached. The Sulfurian cadet, whose name was Zex, began making rapid calculations on his suit's computer. "Dimensional predator," he announced through his suit's speaker system. "Native to higher dimensional space but capable of hunting in standard 3-dimensional reality. Estimated combat effectiveness against our team, 97% probability of total casualties within 6 minutes." More of the creatures began emerging from the forest around them. Each one was slightly different from the others, as if they were variations on a theme rather than identical members of a species. Some had additional limbs that existed only partially in normal space, while others seemed to phase in and out of visibility as they moved. Marcus felt his heart rate spike as the creatures began to circle the team. His enhanced human physiology was flooding his system with adrenaline and other combat stimulants, preparing his body for a fight that he was almost certainly going to lose. But, as he looked around at his teammates, he saw something that surprised him. They weren't panicking. The Nexaran twins had synchronized their bioluminescent displays into a complex pattern that seemed to be some form of rapid tactical communication. Brix was adjusting the harmonic frequency of his crystalline body, apparently attempting to disrupt whatever sensory method the creatures were using to track them. Even Zex was working frantically at his suit systems, probably trying to find some environmental factor they could exploit. Only Veltar seemed frozen with fear, his silver eyes wide as he stared at the approaching predators. His people's enhanced hearing was probably picking up sounds from the creatures that the others couldn't detect, and whatever he was hearing had clearly terrified him. "Veltar," Marcus called softly, "what do you hear?" The Zephyrian's voice was barely a whisper when he responded. "They are not communicating with sound. They are communicating through the death screams of their previous victims." Each creature carries the final moments of everything it has killed, and they are sharing those experiences with each other. The revelation sent a chill through the entire team. These weren't just apex predators, they were something far worse. They were collectors of final moments, feeding not just on flesh but on the terror and despair of their prey. But, as the creatures moved closer, something unexpected happened. The lead predator, the largest of the group, suddenly stopped. Its head turned toward Marcus with an almost mechanical precision, and those pools of swirling darkness that served as its eyes seemed to focus directly on him. For a moment that felt like an eternity, human and interdimensional predators stared at each other across the alien forest floor. Marcus could feel something probing at the edges of his consciousness, examining him in ways that had nothing to do with physical senses. It was looking into his memories, his experiences, his very essence as a human being. Then, without warning, the creature stepped backward. The movement was slight, barely noticeable, but, in the context of an apex predator stalking its prey, it might as well have been a full retreat. The other predators noticed immediately. Their attention shifted from the team as a whole to focus entirely on Marcus, and, one by one, they began to back away as well. Not fleeing, that would have indicated fear, and nothing about these creatures suggested they were capable of fear. Instead, they were showing what could only be described as respect. "What's happening?" whispered one of the cadets Marcus didn't know well, a blue-skinned Altarian whose species was known for their analytical minds. Marcus honestly didn't know. He had no special abilities that would intimidate interdimensional predators, no weapons that could threaten them, and no reputation that would precede him to this distant world. He was just a human cadet from Earth, trying to survive his first major academy exercise. But, as the creatures continued to back away, forming a loose circle around the team but no longer approaching, Marcus began to understand what was happening. It wasn't about who he was or what he could do. It was about what he represented. Earth was a Class 4 death world, which meant that every creature that evolved there had to be tough enough to survive in an environment that would kill most galactic species within hours. But, more than that, Earth was a world where apex predators had to constantly compete with each other for dominance. Humans hadn't reached the top of the food chain through superior physical abilities, they had gotten there through persistence, intelligence, and an almost insane willingness to keep fighting even when victory seemed impossible. The interdimensional predators could sense all of that in Marcus's genetic memory, in the evolutionary history written into his very cells. They recognized him as a fellow apex predator, one whose ancestors had faced down creatures just as terrifying as themselves and emerged victorious. But recognition was different from acceptance. The lead creature took another step forward, and Marcus realized that this wasn't going to be a simple standoff. These predators wanted to test whether he truly deserved the respect they were showing him. The forest around them began to change. The metal trees started to bend and twist, forming an arena-like space with the team at the center. The other interdimensional predators faded back into the shadows between dimensions, leaving only the largest one to face Marcus directly. "It wants single combat," Veltar whispered, his enhanced hearing apparently picking up some form of communication that the others couldn't detect. "It will not harm the rest of us if you accept the challenge." Marcus looked around at his teammates. These weren't just fellow cadets anymore, they were his responsibility. If he refused the challenge, the creatures would probably slaughter all of them within minutes. If he accepted and lost, at least the others might have a chance to escape. "Stay back," he told the team as he stepped forward to meet the predator. "No matter what happens, don't interfere." The creature moved with fluid grace as it approached, its form shifting between solid matter and something that existed beyond normal space. Up close, Marcus could see that its body was covered in what looked like star charts, constellation patterns that moved and changed as he watched. Each pattern probably represented a different victim, a different final moment added to the creature's collection. When the attack came, it was faster than anything Marcus had experienced before. One moment the predator was 3 meters away, the next its claws were inches from his throat. Only his enhanced human reflexes saved him, allowing him to dive aside just in time to avoid being decapitated. But, as he rolled to his feet, Marcus realized that speed wasn't going to be enough. This creature existed partially outside normal space, which meant it could attack from angles that didn't exist in three-dimensional reality. Traditional combat techniques would be useless against something that could phase in and out of existence at will. Instead, Marcus did something that surprised even himself. He stopped trying to avoid the creature's attacks and started walking directly toward it. Every instinct in his body was screaming at him to run, to find cover, to do anything except approach the interdimensional nightmare that was trying to kill him. But something deeper than instinct was guiding him now, something that connected him to every human who had ever faced impossible odds and refused to give up. The predator's attacks became more frenzied as Marcus continued his steady advance. Its claws raked across his survival suit, leaving deep gouges but not penetrating to the skin beneath. Its otherworldly speed allowed it to strike from multiple angles simultaneously, but Marcus kept walking forward as if the attacks were nothing more than an annoyance. It wasn't that the attacks weren't hurting him. Each blow sent waves of pain through his body, and he could feel blood running from numerous small wounds. But pain was just information, and the information it was giving him was that he was still alive, still moving, still fighting. The predator began to show signs of confusion. Its attacks were becoming less coordinated, its movements more erratic. This wasn't how its hunts were supposed to go. Prey was supposed to run, to fight desperately, to fill the air with terror and desperation before finally succumbing to inevitable death. But Marcus wasn't showing fear. He wasn't running or fighting desperately or filling the air with anything except his steady, determined advance. He was demonstrating the single most human trait in existence, the absolute refusal to accept defeat even when victory was impossible. The predator stopped attacking. For a moment, it simply stared at Marcus with those pools of swirling darkness, trying to understand what it was seeing. Then, in a gesture that shocked everyone present, it lowered its head in what could only be interpreted as a bow of respect. When it raised its head again, the star chart patterns on its body had changed. New constellations were forming, but these weren't the death memories of victims. They were something else entirely: recognition patterns, acknowledgement of a worthy opponent, respect from one apex predator to another. The creature backed away slowly, never taking its eyes off Marcus. As it reached the edge of the makeshift arena, it made a sound that was barely audible but somehow conveyed volumes of meaning. It was a hunting call, but not for the team. It was calling to the other interdimensional predators, telling them to mark this territory as claimed by another apex species. Within moments, the forest had returned to its normal configuration. The metal trees straightened, the shadows returned to their proper places, and the oppressive atmosphere of being hunted lifted entirely. The interdimensional predators were gone, melted back into whatever higher dimensional space they normally inhabited. Marcus's teammates approached him cautiously, clearly unsure of what they had just witnessed. The Nexarin twins were flashing complex patterns of amazement and confusion, while Brix's crystalline body was resonating with harmonics that conveyed deep respect. "How?" asked the Altarian cadet, her analytical mind struggling to process what she had seen. "Those creatures are classified as extinction-level threats. A single one should have been able to eliminate our entire team within minutes." Marcus was honestly not sure how to answer. He wasn't entirely certain what had happened himself. All he knew was that when faced with an impossible situation, he had done what humans had always done throughout their species' history: he had refused to give up. "I think," he said slowly, "that sometimes the best way to deal with an apex predator is to convince it that you're an apex predator too." Veltar's enhanced hearing picked up something in the distance, and his expression brightened considerably. "The hunting calls have changed. The creatures are spreading word throughout the forest that this territory belongs to another apex species. We should be safe from interdimensional predators for the remainder of our journey." As the team resumed their trek toward the extraction point, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had changed. The forest around them seemed different now, not necessarily safer, but more respectful. Other creatures they encountered along the way showed the same pattern of behavior as the interdimensional predators. They would approach, assess the team's threat level, and then withdraw without attacking. It took Marcus several hours to realize what was happening. The interdimensional predators hadn't just marked their territory as belonging to another apex species. They had marked Marcus specifically as an apex predator, and that marking was somehow detectable by other dangerous creatures on the planet. Word was spreading through Kepler 442b's ecosystem that a new apex predator had arrived, one that deserved the same respect and caution that the native creatures showed to each other. It was a form of recognition that transcended species barriers, an acknowledgement of membership in the galaxy's most exclusive club, creatures that had earned their place at the top of the food chain through sheer determination and refusal to be conquered. The implications were staggering. Marcus was just one human cadet among hundreds of billions of humans scattered across dozens of worlds. If the creatures of Kepler 442b could recognize him as an apex predator, what did that say about humanity as a whole? As the twin suns began to set on their first day on the Death World, Team 7 made camp in a grove of crystal trees that hummed with bioluminescent energy. The sounds of the alien night were beginning to emerge from the forest around them, but none of the creatures approached their camp. They maintained a respectful distance, as if acknowledging the presence of something that demanded caution. Marcus sat watch during the early hours of the night, listening to the alien sounds and watching the strange constellations wheel overhead. In the distance, he could hear the hunting calls of various predators as they went about their nocturnal activities, but none of those calls were directed toward his team. For the first time since arriving on Kepler 442b, Marcus allowed himself to believe that they might actually survive this exercise. Not because the planet had become less dangerous, but because they had earned the right to walk among its dangers without being automatically targeted as prey. It was, he realized, a very human way to survive in a hostile environment, not by avoiding the dangers, but by convincing the dangers that they deserved respect. As the night deepened and the alien sounds grew more complex, Marcus found himself wondering what other tests awaited them on this death world, and whether his species' stubborn refusal to accept defeat would be enough to see them through the challenges ahead. The second day on Kepler 442b began with a discovery that changed everything. Zex, the Sulfurian cadet in his environmental suit, had been monitoring atmospheric readings throughout the night and made an alarming announcement as the team prepared to break camp. The chemical composition of this planet's atmosphere is shifting, he reported through his suit speakers, his voice carrying an edge of concern that his species rarely displayed. The oxygen levels are increasing while the concentration of methane and sulfur compounds is decreasing. This world is actively terraforming itself. Bricks resonated with a harmonic frequency that conveyed deep unease. Terraforming requires vast energy sources and sophisticated environmental control systems. Natural evolution does not work this rapidly. Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the alien dawn. Planets didn't just terraform themselves unless they were under the control of something with incredible technological capabilities. The Academy's briefing had mentioned that Kepler 442b was uninhabited, but that classification was apparently wrong. Veltar's ears twitched as he picked up sounds beyond the range of the others' hearing. There are mechanical sounds beneath the planet's surface. Deep rumbling, like massive machinery operating far below us. Whatever is changing this world's atmosphere is located underground. The revelation cast their survival exercise in an entirely new light. They weren't just trying to survive on a death world inhabited by apex predators. They were walking across the surface of what appeared to be an active terraforming project run by an unknown intelligence. As Team 7 resumed their journey toward the extraction point, the landscape around them began to change in subtle but unmistakable ways. The metallic trees they had sheltered among the night before were growing visibly taller, their branches extending and interweaving to form complex geometric patterns. The crystalline ground beneath their feet was becoming more refined, its surface shifting from rough natural formations to something that looked almost deliberately crafted. The Nixaran twins, Lux and Nyx, had been scouting ahead using their natural camouflage abilities. When they returned to the main group, their bioluminescent communication patterns were flashing urgent warnings. Structures ahead, Marcus interpreted, having spent considerable time learning to read their light-based language during academy training. Artificial construction. Very large. Not abandoned. The team crested a low ridge and found themselves looking down at something that defied easy description. Spread across the valley below was a city, but not like any city that any of the galactic species had ever built. The structures seemed to grow directly from the planet's surface, towering spires of living metal and crystal that pulsed with internal light. Bridges of what appeared to be hardened energy connected the spires at various levels, and the entire complex seemed to breathe with a slow, steady rhythm. More disturbing than the city's alien architecture was the fact that it was clearly active. Shapes moved along the bridges and, between the spires, too distant to make out clearly but obviously intelligent in their movement patterns. Lights flickered in complex sequences throughout the structures, suggesting active communication networks or possibly some form of distributed consciousness. The Academy database contains no record of intelligent life on Kepler 442b, whispered the Altarian cadet, whose name Marcus had learned was Syra. Her species prided themselves on their perfect memory and analytical capabilities, making her confusion all the more unsettling. Zex had been taking detailed scans of the city with his suit's instruments. Energy signatures are off the scale, he reported. Whatever technology they're using operates on principles that don't match anything in the known galactic database. Power output suggests they could reshape this entire planet within a matter of years. The implications were staggering. The Galactic Military Academy had sent 200 cadets to conduct a survival exercise on what they believed was an uninhabited death world. Instead, they had apparently stumbled onto first contact with a species capable of planetary engineering on a scale that exceeded even the most advanced known civilizations. Marcus felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. As the cadet who had somehow earned recognition from the planet's apex predators, he was emerging as the de facto leader of their team. The decisions he made in the next few hours could determine not just their survival, but potentially the future relationship between humanity and this unknown species. We need to get closer, he decided after considering their options. If we're going to report this to the Academy, we need more information than just distant observations. The descent into the valley was nerve-wracking. The team moved carefully from cover to cover, though the increasingly geometric landscape offered fewer places to hide as they approached the alien city. The air grew thicker and more humid, and all of them could feel a subtle vibration through the ground that spoke of massive machinery operating far below. It was Veltar who first noticed that they were being observed. His enhanced hearing picked up the subtle sounds of movement tracking their progress, and his natural stealth instincts were screaming warnings about unseen watchers. "We are not concealed," he whispered to Marcus during a brief pause behind a cluster of crystal formations. "Multiple observers tracking our approach. They know we are here." Before Marcus could respond, the decision was taken away from them. The ground beneath their feet began to rise, forming a platform that lifted them smoothly into the air. There was no sense of movement or acceleration, just the gradual realization that they were ascending toward the alien city on what appeared to be a solid piece of the planet's surface. The platform carried them directly toward one of the larger spires, its surface opening to receive them like the petals of a flower. As they passed through the opening, Marcus got his first clear look at the city's inhabitants. They were beautiful in an utterly alien way. Tall and graceful, with bodies that seemed to be constructed from the same living metal as their city, they moved with fluid precision that suggested perfect coordination between multiple individuals. Their faces were elongated and elegant, with large eyes that held depths of intelligence that spoke of eons of accumulated knowledge. But it wasn't their appearance that took Marcus's breath away. It was their age. The beings surrounding them weren't just intelligent, they were ancient. Their eyes held the weight of geological time, and their movements carried the confidence of creatures who had watched stars being born and dying. These weren't primitive inhabitants of a death world. They were something far more significant. One of the beings stepped forward, and, when it spoke, its voice seemed to come from the very walls of the chamber around them. "Young ones from the scattered peoples," it said in perfectly clear galactic standard, though its lips didn't move in sync with the words. "You have come to the world that remembers when your ancestors first looked up at the stars." Marcus felt his heart skip a beat. The being was claiming to have knowledge of not just humanity's development, but the development of all the galactic species. That would make this civilization older than recorded history, older than the galactic community itself. "You are the builders," Syra whispered, her analytical mind making connections that the others were still struggling to process. "The ones who left the ancient ruins on dozens of worlds throughout the galaxy. You're supposed to be extinct." The being's expression didn't change, but Marcus sensed amusement in its response. "Extinction is a concept for species that remain bound to single worlds, young analyst. We transcended such limitations long before your peoples developed language." Bricks resonated with harmonic frequencies that conveyed deep respect mixed with fear. His crystalline species had legends of the Builders, ancient beings who had supposedly shaped the galaxy's development in its early eons before disappearing without explanation. "Why are you here?" Marcus asked, stepping forward despite the overwhelming presence of beings who could probably reshape reality with a thought. "This world is supposed to be uninhabited." The Builder's large eyes focused on him with an intensity that felt like being examined by the universe itself. "You are the one who convinced the Shadowhunters to acknowledge your status as Apexborn. Interesting. Your species shows remarkable development for such a short-lived people." You were watching the encounter with the interdimensional predators, Marcus realized. "We watch all things that occur on worlds under our guidance. This place is not uninhabited, young Apexborn. It is a testing ground, a place where we observe how the younger species respond to ultimate challenges. Your survival exercise was never meant to be merely about surviving hostile wildlife." The revelation hit the team like a physical blow. They hadn't stumbled onto first contact by accident. This entire situation had been orchestrated by beings so advanced that they could manipulate events on a galactic scale without anyone realizing it. "The Academy knows," Veltar said quietly. "They must know. They wouldn't send cadets here without understanding what they were walking into." The Builder's expression suggested something that might have been approval. "Your people's hearing serves you well, Scoutborn. Yes, the leaders of your academy know of our presence here. This exercise serves purposes beyond simple survival training." Marcus felt pieces of a vast puzzle beginning to fall into place. "You're testing us. All of us. Not just our ability to survive, but our ability to work together when faced with the impossible. The galaxy stands at a crossroads," the Builder explained, its voice taking on harmonics that seemed to resonate with the very structure of reality. "The younger species have spread among the stars, but they remain divided by fear and mistrust. War comes, young Apexborn. War on a scale that will determine whether your peoples survive to see the next stage of galactic development." Images began forming in the air around them, holographic displays of stunning clarity that showed fleets of starships massing at the edges of known space. But these weren't ships from any of the known galactic species. They were sleek, predatory vessels that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, and their very presence in the images made Marcus's enhanced human instincts scream danger warnings. "The Devourers return," the Builder continued. "They who consume entire civilizations and leave only emptiness behind. We fought them once, eons ago, when the galaxy was young. We won, but at a cost that reduced our numbers to a mere handful. Now they return, and we are too few to stand against them alone." The implications were staggering. The most advanced civilization in galactic history was essentially admitting that they needed help from the younger species to face this returning threat. But if the Builders couldn't handle the Devourers alone, what hope did species like humans, Zephyrians, and the others have? "That's why you're testing us," Marcus said, understanding flooding through him. "You need to know whether the current galactic species can work together effectively enough to be useful allies." "Precisely. Individual species, no matter how advanced, cannot stand against the Devourers. But, united, working in harmony despite your differences, you might provide the diversity of approach and thought that we lack after eons of isolation." Zex had been analyzing the holographic projections with his suit's instruments. "Estimated arrival time for the Devourer fleets," he asked with characteristic sulfurian directness. 18 of your standard months," the Builder replied. "Enough time to prepare, if the younger species prove capable of unity. Not enough time if they remain divided by petty territorial disputes and species prejudice." The weight of responsibility that Marcus had felt earlier was nothing compared to what settled on him now. Not only were they representing their individual species in some cosmic test, they were being evaluated as potential allies in a war that would determine the survival of galactic civilization itself. "What do you need us to do?" he asked. The Builder gestured, and the chamber around them began to shift and change. The walls became transparent, offering a panoramic view of the alien city spread out below them. In the distance, Marcus could see other platforms rising toward the spires, each carrying groups of cadets from the Academy exercise. "Continue your journey to the extraction point," the Builder said. But know that every challenge you face between here and there has been designed to test your ability to work together when facing the impossible. The Shadow Hunters were merely the first test. Greater challenges await. And if we fail? Syra asked, her analytical mind already calculating probabilities. The builder's expression grew somber. Then, the galaxy falls to the Devourers, and the age of organic intelligence comes to an end. Failure is not an option that benefits anyone. The platform began to descend, carrying the team back toward the valley floor. As they departed, the builder called out one final message. Remember, young Apex-born. Your species has survived by refusing to accept defeat even when victory seems impossible. That stubbornness may be the galaxy's greatest hope against the darkness that returns. As they reached the ground and the alien city began to recede behind them, Marcus looked around at his teammates. Each of them had been fundamentally changed by what they had experienced. They were no longer just cadets on a survival exercise, they were the first representatives of their generation to learn about the threat that was coming. The journey ahead would test them in ways that the Academy's survival exercises had never prepared them for. But, as Marcus looked at the determined faces around him, he felt a flicker of hope. They had already proven that they could work together when facing the impossible. Maybe that would be enough. The landscape ahead of them was changing again, becoming more alien and more challenging with each kilometer they traveled. Strange geometric patterns were emerging from the ground, and the air itself seemed to shimmer with barely contained energy. Whatever tests the builders had designed for them next, they would face them together. As the team resumed their journey toward the extraction point, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking toward something far more significant than just the end of a training exercise. They were walking toward the future of galactic civilization itself. In the distance, he could hear the calls of apex predators acknowledging their passage, but now he understood that those creatures were the least of the challenges awaiting them. The real test would be whether a group of young beings from different worlds could learn to function as a single, unified force against a threat that had once nearly destroyed the galaxy. The stakes couldn't be higher, and failure truly wasn't an option. But, as Marcus walked forward with his alien teammates beside him, he carried with him the stubborn human conviction that even the impossible could be overcome through determination and refusal to give up. The galaxy was depending on it. The final test came at dawn on their third day, just as the extraction point came into view across a vast crystalline plain. What should have been the end of their ordeal instead revealed itself as the beginning of something far more challenging. The extraction point was supposed to be a simple landing pad where transport ships would collect the surviving teams. Instead, Marcus and his teammates found themselves staring at a massive arena carved directly into the planet's surface. The structure was clearly ancient, predating even the builder's city they had encountered, with towering walls that seemed to absorb sound and light. At the center of the arena sat a single, ominous structure that pulsed with dark energy. Other teams of cadets were arriving from different directions, all showing signs of having faced their own impossible challenges during the journey. Marcus counted approximately 150 survivors out of the original 200, which was actually better than the mortality rates typical for Class 7 Deathworld exercises. But something told him that the real challenge was just beginning. Commander Theclon was waiting for them at the arena's entrance, but he was no longer alone. Standing beside the massive Brutarian was a figure that made Marcus's enhanced human instincts scream danger warnings. Tall and elegant in a way that suggested perfect predatory efficiency, the newcomer wore no uniform or identifying marks. But the way Commander Theclon deferred to their presence made it clear that this being held authority far beyond anything the Academy could grant. Cadets, Commander Theclon announced as the surviving teams assembled, you have completed the survival portion of your exercise with acceptable casualty rates. However, your true evaluation begins now. The mysterious figure stepped forward, and, when it spoke, its voice carried harmonics that seemed to resonate with the very structure of reality. Marcus realized with a shock that this was another builder, but one that felt fundamentally different from the being they had encountered in the city. Where that builder had radiated ancient wisdom, this one projected something far more dangerous. I am the examiner, it announced. For eons beyond your comprehension, I have tested younger species to determine their worthiness for advancement. Most fail. Those that fail are permitted to continue their existence in ignorance, never learning of the greater cosmos that surrounds them. The arena's walls began to glow with internal light, and Marcus could see complex symbols appearing along their surface. The markings seemed to shift and change as he watched, suggesting some form of active information display that his human eyes couldn't quite process. But failure is not an option for your generation, the examiner continued. The Devourers return, and we require allies capable of thinking beyond the limitations that have defined galactic civilization for the past million years. You will face challenges that will test not just your individual abilities, but your capacity to function as a unified force despite your fundamental differences. Veltar's enhanced hearing was picking up subsonic vibrations from deep beneath the arena. Massive machinery activating below us, he whispered to Marcus. Whatever they're preparing to test us with requires enormous amounts of power. The floor of the arena began to shift and change, forming a complex three-dimensional maze that extended both above and below the original ground level. But this wasn't just a physical maze, and Marcus could see that some sections existed in what appeared to be folded space, creating paths that curved back on themselves in ways that defied normal geometry. You will work in mixed teams, the examiner announced. Species barriers are meaningless in the face of extinction. Learn to function as one organism with many specialized parts, or watch your civilizations burn. The team assignments were even more challenging than before. Marcus found himself grouped with cadets from species he had barely interacted with during academy training, a methane-breathing voidwalker whose environmental suit made communication difficult, a trio of hive-minded collective units who thought and acted as a single entity, a massive geotic whose rock-like body moved at a geological pace, and several others whose physiological requirements seemed fundamentally incompatible with coordinated action. As the teams entered the maze, Marcus quickly realized that this wasn't just a test of their ability to navigate complex terrain. The maze was actively hostile, with sections that phased in and out of existence, gravity fields that shifted without warning, and atmospheric zones that would be lethal to some species while being perfectly normal for others. The Voidwalker, whose name was difficult for Marcus to pronounce in galactic standard, immediately began having problems in the oxygen-rich atmosphere of the first maze section. Their methane-breathing physiology couldn't handle the environment, and their environmental suits' life support systems weren't designed for extended operation in such conditions. Meanwhile, the collective units were struggling with the maze's information-dampening fields, which interfered with their ability to maintain their hive-mind connection. Cut off from their shared consciousness, they began moving erratically, clearly disoriented by the experience of individual thought. The geotic, Kront, was having the opposite problem. Their massive size and slow movement rate made them excellent for blocking passages and providing stable anchor points, but they couldn't navigate the maze's tighter spaces or keep up with the team's movement through rapidly changing sections. It would have been easy to abandon the slower or more problematic team members and push ahead with those who could move quickly and efficiently. Marcus could see other teams making exactly that choice, leaving behind cadets who couldn't keep up or adapt to the maze's challenges. But something about that approach felt fundamentally wrong to him. "We don't leave anyone behind," he announced to his team during a brief rest in a stable section of the maze. "If we're supposed to be learning to function as a unified force, that means finding ways to make everyone's abilities contribute to our success." The collective units, still struggling with their severed hive-mind connection, managed to voice a response through their primary speaker. "Inefficient. Optimal path requires abandoning slow-moving units and atmosphere-dependent members." "Maybe," Marcus admitted. "But I don't think this test is about finding the optimal path. I think it's about proving that we can make the impossible work anyway." Over the next several hours, Marcus watched his team slowly transform from a collection of incompatible individuals into something resembling a functional unit. They learned to use the Voidwalker's methane-breathing physiology as an advantage in sections where the atmosphere was toxic to other species. The collective units discovered that their individual thought processes, while disorienting, allowed them to consider multiple approaches to problems simultaneously. Kront's massive size and slow movement became assets when they needed to literally reshape sections of the maze or provide stable platforms for other team members to reach higher levels. But the maze was only the beginning of their challenges. As they progressed deeper into the arena's complex structure, they encountered obstacles that seemed designed to exploit every possible source of conflict between different species. Sections where the lighting was optimized for one species' vision while being completely blinding to others. Atmospheric zones where the pheromone communications of some species triggered fight or flight responses in others. Puzzle sections that required knowledge of mathematical concepts that some species' minds were literally incapable of grasping. Each challenge forced them to find new ways to work together, to overcome not just the immediate obstacles but their own instinctive reactions to working with beings so fundamentally different from themselves. Marcus found himself drawing on every piece of cross-species training the Academy had provided, but, more than that, he was learning to think beyond the limitations that his human perspective normally imposed. The breakthrough came when they reached a section of the maze that seemed impossible to navigate. The passage required precise timing to move through shifting gravity fields, perfect coordination between team members with vastly different movement rates, and the ability to think in 4 dimensions while maintaining awareness of threats that existed partially outside normal space. Marcus stared at the challenge for several minutes, feeling his human mind trying to process requirements that seemed to exceed what any single consciousness could handle. Then, he realized that was exactly the point. This wasn't meant to be solved by any individual mind, no matter how advanced. It required them to function as a distributed intelligence, each member contributing their species' unique cognitive abilities to create a problem-solving capacity that exceeded the sum of its parts. "We're thinking about this wrong," he announced to his team. "We keep trying to find ways for each of us to overcome our individual limitations. But, what if the limitations aren't bugs, what if they're features?" Working together, they developed an approach that turned their differences into advantages. The Voidwalkers' methane-breathing physiology allowed them to scout sections of the maze that would be toxic to the others. The collective unit's experience with hive mind thinking, even damaged, let them coordinate complex timing sequences. Krant's geological perception of time helped them understand the pattern of the shifting gravity fields. Marcus's human stubbornness kept them moving forward even when the challenge seemed impossible. As they progressed through the final sections of the maze, Marcus began to understand what the builders were really testing. This wasn't about proving that different species could work together despite their differences. It was about demonstrating that those differences, when properly coordinated, created capabilities that no single species could achieve alone. The realization hit him just as they emerged into the arena's central chamber, where the dark energy structure pulsed with increasing intensity. This wasn't just a test of their ability to function as allies. It was preparation for facing an enemy that required exactly the kind of distributed intelligence they were learning to create. The Devourers, Marcus realized, were probably a hive mind species of unprecedented sophistication. No single species approach would be effective against beings that could think and act as a unified galactic intelligence. The only hope was to create an opposing intelligence that was even more sophisticated, one built from the voluntary cooperation of multiple species rather than the enforced unity of a hive mind. The final challenge was waiting for them in the central chamber. It wasn't a puzzle or an obstacle course or even a direct combat scenario. Instead, it was a simulation, a holographic projection showing Devourer fleets approaching a populated star system, with defensive forces that clearly represented the current galactic civilization. "Demonstrate your solution," the examiner's voice echoed through the chamber. "Show us how the younger species would coordinate their response to this threat." What followed was the most intensive strategic planning session of Marcus's life. Teams of cadets from different species worked together to analyze the Devourer fleet's capabilities, identify weaknesses in their approach, and develop countermeasures that drew on the unique strengths of each galactic civilization. The solutions they developed were unlike anything in the existing military doctrine. Instead of massive fleet battles fought along predictable lines, they proposed coordinated strikes that exploited the three-dimensional thinking of aquatic species, the time perception advantages of long-lived species, the rapid adaptation capabilities of short-lived species like humans, and dozens of other unique perspectives that had never been combined in a single strategic framework. As the simulation ran through their proposed battle plan, Marcus watched with growing amazement as the defensive forces began to gain ground against the Devourer fleets. Not through superior firepower or advanced technology, but through the kind of unpredictable, multi-layered approach that could only emerge from truly cooperative intelligence. When the simulation ended with the Devourer fleets in full retreat, the arena fell silent for a long moment. Then, the examiner stepped forward, and, for the first time since Marcus had encountered it, the ancient being's expression suggested something that might have been satisfaction. "Acceptable," it announced. The younger species show potential for development beyond their current limitations. Training will commence immediately. The arena began to dissolve around them, revealing that they had somehow been transported back to the Academy's main campus during the simulation. Students, instructors, and Academy officials were waiting for them, but Marcus could see immediately that everything had changed. The expressions on their faces suggested that news of the Devourer threat had already spread throughout the galactic government. Commander Theclon approached the assembled cadets with an expression that mixed pride and grim determination. "Congratulations on completing your survival exercise," he said. "Your real education begins now. You have 18 months to prepare yourselves and your respective species for a war that will determine the future of galactic civilization." As the cadets dispersed to begin their new training, Marcus found himself walking alongside several of his teammates from the maze. The barriers that had once seemed insurmountable between their different species now felt like interesting challenges to overcome rather than fundamental incompatibilities. Veltar's enhanced hearing picked up conversations happening throughout the Academy's corridors. "The word is spreading quickly," he reported. "Every species in the galactic community is being informed of the threat. There's fear, but also determination." "Will it be enough?" asked Syra, her analytical mind already calculating the odds of success. Marcus looked up at the alien sky above the Academy, knowing that somewhere beyond those strange constellations, the Devourer fleets were making their way toward galactic civilization. The challenge ahead was greater than anything any of their species had ever faced alone. But they weren't alone anymore. The survival exercise on Kepler 442b had proven that beings from different worlds could learn to function as a single, unified intelligence when the stakes were high enough. The interdimensional predators had recognized him as an apex predator, but now Marcus understood that the real strength wasn't in individual dominance, it was in the collective refusal to accept defeat that emerged when different species chose to stand together. "It'll be enough," he said with the stubborn human confidence that had carried his species from a single death world to the stars. "We've got 18 months to prove that cooperation can beat conquest, that diversity can defeat uniformity, and that the galaxy's species are stronger together than any of us are alone." As they walked toward their new training assignments, Marcus could hear the sounds of preparation beginning all around them. The Academy was transforming from a place of education to a center of war preparation, and cadets who had begun their exercise as students were emerging as the first members of a new kind of military force. The galaxy was about to discover what happened when apex predators from different worlds decided to hunt together. The Devourers were coming, but they would find their prey had evolved beyond anything they had encountered before. The real test was just beginning, but Marcus Chan and his fellow cadets were ready to show the universe what the younger species could accomplish when they refused to accept the impossible as an excuse for defeat.